Welcome to this course about React. It's great to have you on board. My name is Maximilian Schwarzmüller and I'm a freelance web developer and React developer. I worked with React a lot and I can tell you it's an amazing library for creating highly reactive and super fast JavaScript-driven web applications. The JavaScript-driven part is especially important because since React is a JavaScript library, it's of course about writing your web apps in JavaScript. And that in turn is amazing because since JavaScript runs in the browser, it allows you to create super fast web apps that feel like mobile apps. Users don't have to wait for page reloads. Now React is probably the most popular JavaScript library you can learn these days, and for a good reason. You will learn all of its core features throughout this course and way more than that. You will learn what React is about, how it works, and why you might want to use it. You will learn how to build components with React, how to use Redux for better state management, how to use the React router, and you'll not just learn this in simple projects or theory. No, we will build an entire React application throughout this course, the Burger Builder, which is an amazing application utilizing all the concepts you learn in this course so that you have a really solid understanding of all the concepts taught throughout this course. By the end of the course, you'll therefore have way more than just a solid understanding of React, and you'll be able to dive deeper into more challenging projects and apply for React developer jobs or become a React developer as a freelancer, whatever your goal is. So let's get started with React. What, why, and how? Let's start with the what is React question. And let me cite a phrase from the official React page. React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. Now that's a nice sentence, but what does it mean? The first important part is the JavaScript library part. It is a JavaScript library. It is about building JavaScript-driven apps. React apps run in the browser. They don't run on the server, they run in the browser. And that gives us a great advantage. Things happen instantly since they happen in the user's browser. We don't have to wait for a server response to get a new page or to render something new. The other important part in that sentence is the user interfaces part. User interfaces are basically what the user sees, and React is all about using components for building these. If you think about it, you can split up any web page into components. Here's an example. This is just any random web page we can think of. We might have this header area, a sidebar, and then on the right some content. Now we clearly can split this up into components. We would have a header component, a sidebar component, and then a headline and an article content component. Now why is thinking like this important or useful? Because if we split up our web app, our website, into such components, we can build these building blocks, these components, as contained pieces of code. We don't have to build our entire web page as one bigger picture. We can build all these tiny things on their own. This of course makes working in teams easier, but even if we're working alone, it makes it easy for us to keep our code manageable. If we change the headline later on, we only have to go into that component and update it, and we don't have to find that code on our entire web page code. We also can easily reuse components then. If we have a list item component and we want to output a list of these, list items, then we only have to write the code once and can then easily reuse it. Because, and that's important, React components can be thought of as custom HTML elements. In the end, you're just writing custom HTML elements. This is what React is about. And it therefore solves the problem of having to build complex user interfaces with what HTML and JavaScript gives you by writing maintainable, manageable, and reusable pieces of that code, which you then can throw into your web app wherever you need to use it. Let's have a look at some examples. So in the last lecture, I explained that React is all about components and that components are awesome. Let's actually see this on a real web page. Here's reactjs.org, which is the official webpage of the React team. And if we have a look at it, it is actually built with React, of course. This looks like a normal webpage, and it is, of course, but we can split this up into components. We got this header component, and in there we got these single navigation item components. We got this starting image call to action component here, and we got all our elements down here where they advertise React and what it is about. We see more components here, like these image code snippet components here with some descriptions to the left of it. All these things are basically building blocks, which we can of course easily consider as reusable pieces. And actually they are reusing this element here. We got one element here, and then the same element with different content being used below it. Now, of course, you can hard code all that with just HTML, JavaScript, and CSS, but then you will have to repeat your code over and over again. Here, with components, you build your own HTML element, so to say, and then you just reuse that element. And behind the scenes, this HTML element has all this content already inside of it, and we'll see this in detail in a second. Another good example would be Udemy. Here on the Udemy page where I searched for Vue.js, an alternative to React, there we see we get a lot of components too. We got the whole header with the search bar component. Then we got the search result summary component here, where it also allows us to filter the search results. And then the search results themselves. We got reused list item components here. Each of them has an image and a different title, but in the core, they all are the same. They all have the same structure. And Udemy also uses a JavaScript framework to achieve this and to have an easier time developing and that's important, maintaining and updating this page. So this is why components are awesome and why we as a developer probably want to use components, and that is why React is all about components. Now that we know what React actually is, it's time to get our hands dirty. And for that, I visit codepen.io. That is like a web editor, which allows us to write very simple HTML, CSS, and JavaScript apps, or really more like a playground. We won't really use that to build real projects. In this course, we will use a local setup for that. But it is great to dive into React. So on codepen.io, you can click on create and create a so-called pen. That is simply a workspace where you can write HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. Now in this editor, you got three areas for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And now let's write a very simple application, a demo, to see how we write something with normal HTML, JavaScript, and so on, and how we then add React to maybe have an easier time creating such an application. For that, in the HTML part of this editor, I'll create a new div. And you can quickly create this by typing div and hitting tab. This will automatically expand this. And in there, I will now add a h1 tag and simply output max, my name, and below that a paragraph where I say your age 28. This is my age. And of course, feel free to use your data here. So this now leads to the output below. It updates automatically. Now let's quickly give this some styling. Let's simply give this div maybe a class of, let's say, person, the name is up to you, and add this person CSS class with some normal CSS code where I simply give this, let's say, a border, 1 pixel solid, and this gray with CCC, and a box shadow of 0, 2 pixels, 2 pixels, and let's say the same gray. Let's maybe use a slightly brighter one here, EEE, for the border. Let's now also give this a width of, let's say, 200 pixels and a padding of 20 pixels. And now we have this card-like look you see below there. Now that is such a person card, information, holding information about a person, let's say. We can also set this to display inline block and give it a margin of 10 pixels, because now what I can do is I can, of course, replicate this and add a second person, let's say Manu, who has an age of 29. That's my colleague. So now we got these two person cards, and you could easily think of this as a normal web application where you output some information about users or about the team behind your blog you're creating, something like that. And we're using only HTML and CSS here. Now we can already see one limitation kind of. We're always reusing the same HTML code here. Now that isn't too problematic here. It would be more problematic if we would do something with each of these snippets with JavaScript even. But even without that, we can think of this part here as a component. This person div always is structured in the same way, just the data inside of it varies. This is where React comes in, though React shines the most as we connect this to JavaScript logic too. But still, we can already use React to create reusable components here. For that, let's add React. I'm going to shrink this CSS part a tiny bit, and in the JavaScript area, I first of all have to import React. You can click on that gear icon next to JavaScript, and then you can download or import some external JavaScript libraries. And React is such an external library. Actually, it's so popular that on CodePen, you can go to the Quick Add dropdown and simply scroll to React. And this will add it. Now here it adds version 15.6.1, might differ at the point of time you're viewing this. In this course, I will cover version 16, so you're learning the latest React, and in the local setup we'll use in this course, we'll also use that latest React version, no worries. Here, however, we're using an older one, but for the demo here, this does not matter at all. We also need to quick add React DOM. That is another package from the React team. React itself kind of is the logic we need for creating these React components. I told you that React is all about components. React DOM is then about rendering these components to the real DOM. With these two packages added, we're almost there, but React uses a special JavaScript syntax and a lot of next generation JavaScript features. I'll come back to this later in the course. I'll have a whole module where I introduce you to the most important next-gen features React uses. So to unlock the usage of these features and this special syntax, in the JavaScript preprocessor dropdown, you have to choose Babel. That simply is a tool which compiles the next-generation JavaScript code you're writing here to code that runs fine in the browser, so that we write code with all features we want, but ship code that works in the browser. And with that, you can click Save and Close, and now we can start writing our React app here in the JavaScript section. So why don't we do that? Let's create a React component so that we have a reusable custom HTML element we can use instead of repeating this HTML code here on the left. In its most basic form, and you're going to learn about a different form in this course too, in its most basic form, a React component is just a function. So we can create a new function and maybe name this person. Make sure it starts with a capital P. This is required to use it correctly with React. This person component is a normal function, but it has to return the code you actually want to render to the DOM. And here React uses a special syntax which is called JSX. I'm using parentheses here to be able to write or to return some multi-line code. And now I'm going to copy the code here from the left and paste it into my return statement here. And this certainly looks strange now. It looks like HTML in JavaScript, which wouldn't work normally. And it wouldn't if we hadn't added Babel here as a preprocessor. Babel, if configured correctly, which it automatically is here, allows us to use this special syntax which looks like HTML, but which isn't. And I will dive deeper into that syntax in the next course modules. It's called JSX, and it's just syntactical sugar. Behind the scenes, this gets compiled to normal JavaScript code. We can use it here though to have an easier time writing what we actually want to render. Fine, so now we got that function, and I said that this is a React component. But of course, right now it's just a function. To turn this into a React component, we actually have to use React to render it to the screen. So I'll get rid of my person here on the left, and instead I'll add a new div here, and I'll give it an ID of, let's say, P1. You can choose any ID you want though. Now, the React package we imported is responsible for correctly parsing this code here, this JSX code. The other package we imported was React DOM, if you remember. You can always check here on the gear icon, React DOM. This actually exposes an object, React DOM, written like that, with DOM all being capital characters, which has a render method. This method allows us to render a JavaScript function as a component to the real DOM. And that treated as a component part is exactly what React takes care about. We can then render this function, but not by referencing it like this, but by actually turning it into a HTML element. Again, behind the scenes using this JSX syntax, which is understood by React. So I write this as my custom self-closing HTML element, and render then takes another argument where I specify where to render this. And there I reach out to the document, and I can use the query selector, so normal JavaScript code, to select any element with the ID P1. And that again is normal JavaScript code, the normal query selector. With that, I'm telling React that I want to render this function, the person component, in this place here on the left. And it does. Now the styling is lost because class actually is a keyword in JavaScript, so React turns this into class name. And that's the best proof that this looks like HTML but isn't. It uses a custom syntax which in 99% of the cases is like HTML, but behind the scenes it's transformed to JavaScript. And now you see we have our person class here again, Max, treated as a custom component, which we can also verify by the fact that our inline block styling here is kind of ignored because we're wrapping this in a custom element which is treated as a block statement. Now I'll dive into styling in this course. For now, let's just be happy that we got our component rendered here. It's not really reusable though. If I had a second hook in my HTML file here, in my HTML part, let's say with ID P2, and I wanted to render a different component, a different person, I would have to hard code the values into that and actually create a new component. The great thing about React and why components are so awesome and save us a lot of time is that we can configure them dynamically as we need them. So here what I'll do is I'll actually add an argument to this person function, which I'll name props. You can choose any name you want, but the concept I'm using here is called props. React automatically gives me an argument in that function I turned into a component with this syntax down here with the person JSX code. And prop simply contains all the attributes I add to my own component. So I could add name Max and age, let's say 28, like this. And if I do this, now we can output this in our person component. We just need to dynamically access this props element, this props argument. We output dynamic content in React with curly braces, opening and closing, and only one pair, no double curly braces, only one pair of curly braces. And there we reach out to props and then .name to get this name attribute I passed, and props age to output that age property I passed, so props age. And now we're using the properties, the attributes we're passing to our own component. And that's pretty cool because now if we repeat this React DOM render call here for P2, so make sure to exchange this in the second query selector, we can pass different props to that component, like menu and 29. And now both components use the same base, as you can see. They use the same function, which is turned into a component by React, but we're really taking advantage of the component concept because we only wrote the HTML code once, and now we can reuse it over and over again. And I bet you can see the potential of this. In very big applications, you can compose the entire application of reusable pieces. And this component isn't even using any logic. It doesn't listen to clicks or stuff like that. In apps such as the app we build in this course, we will of course do that. we will append our own logic to our components. And then we have small, reusable, maintainable, and easy to manage pieces with their own logic contained in them, which we can use anywhere to build amazing applications. That's the idea behind React, and that is why it's so great and why this component concept is so great. Now let me do one more thing though. Right now I'm calling React DOM render twice. There's nothing wrong with that. But actually, we can also do this a bit differently. We could have one div here in the HTML part, which has an ID of app or root. Doesn't matter, any ID of your choice. Now I'll get rid of the second React DOM render call, and I will add a variable here. This variable, I'll name app, but this name is also up to you. But this variable also will hold some JSX code. And I'm just wrapping this in parentheses so that I can write this code over multiple lines. Now here, what I can do is, I can now output my person component as I did before. We have to wrap it with a div though, because JSX has the requirement of only having one root element, so adjacent elements are not allowed. I will also talk about this in the course though. There are ways around this limitation. So now I added two person component usages to my app variable here. And now I simply mount the app variable in the place of this element with the ID app, which I select by adjusting my query selector. And now you see I got the two elements now next to each other, because now they're rendered in the same hook, in the same element, so to say, in the same div. And this method of only having one hook, one React DOM render call, and then creating an app there with nested components is the far more popular way of creating React apps. It is the way I will use in this course, and in the next lectures I will talk about this versus the alternative with multiple React DOM render calls. But be aware, this is the way you'll see far more often. With this approach, you create so-called single-page applications. Now, this is our first React app. Now let's dive deeper into React and let's continue with the course and really get started with React. So we already got our hands dirty and we saw how we build a React app. Now, this already answers a bit why we might want to use React. There are more reasons why we want to use React. React helps us with a problem we'll encounter with normal JavaScript. The UI state becomes difficult to manage. In bigger JavaScript applications, you have to manually target elements in your DOM, and if you then change the structure of your HTML code, chances are you need to change the way you targeted your elements because you used query selector. Or even if you use jQuery, traversing the DOM is easier, but it's still always something you have to keep in mind. And if you got more complex web apps where you dynamically add and remove elements, this quickly can become cumbersome. In our course project, we build an app which is highly dynamic, where we are able to build a burger and dynamically add and remove ingredients. If you write this with normal JavaScript code, it's going to be a nightmare. So React helps us by making this whole UI state management a non-issue. It allows us to focus on our business logic instead of keeping our application from exploding. And additionally, React is maintained by a big community. So chances are the React code is written better than we could have ever written it. So therefore it's highly efficient and fast. And the bigger your application gets, the more this matters too. And finally, React features a huge ecosystem and an extremely active community, which means that there's a great chance that for a given problem you face, you'll find a solution or an extra package you can add to fix it. All these are reasons why React is awesome and why you definitely should consider it for your next project and why you made the right choice to start with this course. Now there's not just React, there are also alternatives. React, of course, is what we'll cover in this course, but there also is Angular and there would be Vue.js. And there are others like Backbone or Ember, but Angular and Vue are the most popular alternatives. And I can only recommend diving into these two to really pick your favorite. I also got courses on them if you are interested. All three of them are great at creating highly scalable web applications that look and feel good to the user. Not so much an alternative is jQuery. You might think it is one, but jQuery is really only about traversing the DOM and targeting elements in the DOM. Now, as you saw in our example, React is about just declaring what you see and focusing on the logic instead on focusing on the how. And therefore, React, Angular, and Vue allow you to create more powerful applications because you can focus on the logic and your business model and not so much on the technical side of actually reaching that element you wanted to change. When we talk about React, or also about Angular and Vue as a side note, we also have to keep in mind that we can essentially build two kinds of web applications with all these libraries and frameworks. We can build a single page application or a multi-page application. Now, what's the difference? In a single page application, we only get back one single HTML file by the server. And we get back this file at the first time the user visits the page. So the first time the user visits example.com. Thereafter, everything is managed with JavaScript, with React. The entire page consists of components which are rendered and handled by JavaScript. On the other hand, in a multi-page application, we get back multiple HTML pages where each page has the content for a given route, a given URL we visited. For example.com and example.com/users, we get back two different pages. That's important. Now, on multi-page applications, we might also use React, but only to create little widgets, so to say. So individually contained components we dump into that page, but not the entire page is managed by React. We also see this on some pages, but the more popular approach these days is the single page application approach, because if you manage the entire page with JavaScript, you never have to go back to the server and reload the page. And that is an amazing user experience because everything happens instantly. And even if the user needs to wait, you're showing a spinner or you're still presenting a reactive web app. You're not just showing a loading page where the user can't do anything. So in single page applications, our page is built up with components and every component is a React component. And the entire page also is managed by a root React component and is just under React's control. In the multi-page application, on the other hand, we also could split up our app into theoretical components, but actually a lot of the page is just going to be normal HTML and CSS code, and some widgets we dump in, like an image gallery or something like that, is managed by React. So the entire page is not under React's control. The individual widgets don't know of each other's existence. Therefore, in the single application case, which is the case we'll cover in this course, we typically only have one React DOM render call, this method you saw in the previous lectures where we created our first app. Now, we only need one because we have one root app component there, which is mounted to the DOM, which hosts all other React components. In the multi-page application, we would typically call React DOM render more often to render our different components in different places of the app. You saw that React DOM render allows you to pick a place in your HTML code where you want to render your app. And therefore, you have these widgets which don't know of each other's existence. Now, you can build such an application too, and the React code you write won't differ, so this course actually covers both. But I will focus on the single page application case, since that also allows us to use some libraries like React Router and is the most popular way of creating web apps these days, and also the approach I can only recommend to you. So now that we had a look at the basics of React and what React is about, let me explain what this course is about and what we're going to cover in this course. We're almost done getting started. Only a couple of more words I want to spend on how you get the most out of this course, and then we'll be leaving this module. Thereafter, you'll actually find an optional second module. In this optional module, I will walk you through the most important next-generation JavaScript features we're going to use in this course. When writing React applications, you typically use quite a lot of these next-gen features, like arrow functions or classes. You do this because this allows you to write cleaner React code, and it's the de facto standard to use all these features. If you already feel comfortable using next-generation JavaScript features, so if you already know ES6 and so on, then you can skip the next module, and I will mention this there too. Otherwise, you got a nice module where I'll ensure that we're all on the same page and that you got solid fundamentals about all these features we're about to use. And you can always go back to that module if you later in the course encounter something that looks strange or new to you. After this optional module, the real second module is the module where we dive into the React basics. That's of course a super important module. You will learn how you can create React components, that there is more than one way of doing so, and how you can communicate between components, how a React application is generally built. This section also includes things like how can we output lists, or how can we render some content conditionally. Thereafter, it's time to dive into debugging, because we all make mistakes. You will write code that fails. That's natural, that happens to everyone. It's super important that you then know how to recover, how to debug your application, how to find that error that makes your program crash. We'll have a look at this in this debugging module. After debugging, we'll dive into styling. How can we style our React components, and how can we make sure that the styling we apply to a component only gets applied to that component and not to other components as well? We'll take a look at that in this module. Thereafter, we'll dive deeper into components. We'll already have learned a lot about them, but here we will learn which lifecycle they follow. We will learn how we can cleverly control whether React should check for updates of a component or not, and much more. So that is truly an important module, which will make sure that you understand the internals of React and that you got the tools you need for bigger or more advanced React applications. After that, you will have learned a lot about components, but we're far from being done. We'll then dive into HTTP requests. How can we connect our React application to the outside world? How can we fetch data from a server or send it to that server? How can we do all of that in a single page or also in a multi-page application with asynchronous HTTP requests, AJAX? That is what we'll have a look at in this module. And thereafter we'll dive into routing. Routing is a core feature when building single-page applications. Because with routing, we can actually handle different URLs, like /user and /products, and render different pages, even though technically we only have one HTML page, and we simply parse the URL with JavaScript and re-render the parts of the DOM that need to be re-rendered to display a new page. That sounds very complex, and that is why we will use a package for this. Routing is a super important and key module of this course, therefore. Now, one important note at this point. All these concepts are always taught in theory and with tiny demo projects. We will also have an overarching course project, the Burger Builder, and we will regularly go back to that project and apply the features you learned in the previous module to the course project. So we will start by planning and creating it, then we will use advanced component concepts, we will apply styling, and we will also apply routing there, so that we can gradually see our project become better and better, and so that you always have a great way of seeing all these things, not just in theory or in tiny demo projects, but in a real project. So the things I mentioned here are only the overarching topics. This course actually has more modules because we have all these in-between practice-oriented modules. Back to the outline here though. After routing, we'll dive into forms and validation. In almost any web application you build, you need to fetch user input, and in this module I will show you how to do this in a dynamic way and how to also validate user input. And thereafter it's time for Redux, and more Redux. We'll dive deeply into Redux, which is an independent third-party library, but which of course is used in many React projects. We'll start at the basics, we'll learn why we might want to use Redux, and then we will learn more advanced use cases like using asynchronous actions in Redux and way more. This is an important module and I can't wait to dive into this and then also apply it to the course project together with you. After Redux, we'll dive into authentication. Probably every web application has some sort of authentication, allowing users to sign up and sign in. Here, I will show you how to implement this. I will always, as in all these modules, focus on the client side, so on the React side, and not on the server side. But of course, I will explain how to implement authentication so that it works with any backend that supports this kind of authentication. We'll of course also apply this to the course project. After authentication, we'll dive into testing. Only an introduction, to be honest, because testing is enough content, or you can create enough content about testing to fill an entire course. But I want to introduce you to how you test React applications, which tools you use, and how to think about testing React apps. After testing, we'll of course also learn how to deploy a React application, so how to really ship it to a real server. And thereafter, I got loads of bonus content. For example, a whole module about animating React applications. Possible next steps where you could dive into after finishing this module. A module about Next.js, which is basically a library building up on React and making server-side rendered applications a breeze. A module where we will build our own workflow, our own project from scratch with Webpack and a couple of build tools. And way more. So a lot of content in this course. It has the length it has for a reason in the end. And I can't wait to dive into it together with you. So why don't we do that and just start with the course? So let's get started with the course. But first, I want to explain you how you can get the most out of this course. Obviously, you watch the videos and I highly recommend that you also code along. Write the code yourself. This is how you learn the most. Additionally, check my source code if you're encountering issues. You can find it attached to the end of each module and also to a lot of lectures throughout the module. And I do provide this source code because sometimes it's just a tiny typo. And if you then run my source code and compare it to yours, you will be able to find out what's wrong in your code and get a deeper understanding of why that went wrong. Also, consider the many hints and things I will teach you in the debugging section of this course. There I will teach you how to handle React errors and how to react to them and fix them. Definitely something you have to know how to do, so use that knowledge you gain there to fix any issues you encounter. Now, if you're stuck and you can't find the error, ask in the Q&A section. My team and I are more than happy to help you there. But that's important. Don't just ask there, also answer there. I'm not saying this because I don't want to answer your questions. I will. But if you answer, you'll learn way more than if you ask. Asking is so simple, but answering is hard, and you can't go wrong there. Even if your answer is wrong, no one's going to kill you. Instead, you're going to learn if people correct you. And answering forces you to think about a problem and find a solution. If you really want to become a great React developer, you have to solve problems. And answering in the Q&A section is a good way of practicing just that. And finally, practice, practice, practice. It's as easy as that. Even after you finish this course, you gotta practice the things you learned. You have to build your own demo projects, set your own challenges, do the exercises from this course, alter the code you learn in this course, practice React. If you follow these steps and follow through this entire course, you'll be an awesome React developer and you'll be able to apply for jobs, become a React freelancer, whatever you want. With that, let's dive into React and learn how it works.